Poland bear attack horror. Women killed by bear in remote Polish forest during antler hunt with son. A 58-year-old woman was tragically killed in a bear attack in a remote mountainous forest area of southeastern Poland, according to local officials and family members. Now let's dive deeper and explore every layer of this story on our AI
I
podcast.
want you to think about the mobile phone sitting in your pocket right now. Or maybe it's just resting on the table next to you.
Right.
We all just kind of walk around with this, this profound, unquestioned assumption that it keeps us connected to the rest of the world.
It absolutely does. I mean, it creates this sort of psychological safety blanket for us.
Exactly. Like you could be miles away from civilization, completely isolated in this wild landscape. But the moment you dial a number and hear a familiar voice in your ear,
You feel safe.
yeah, your brain just tells you that you aren't alone. You feel protected, insulated from the physical world around you by this invisible digital tether.
Right. And it's a very powerful illusion.
It is. And our deep dive today explores what happens when that exact illusion of safety is violently severed, when the brutal reality of the physical environment just reasserts itself in an instant.
Yeah, we're looking at a deeply tragic and really rare event out of the remote forests of southern Poland today.
Right, a fatal bear attack on a 58-year-old woman. And what makes this report so compelling, I think, is that it really forces us to examine the collision of modern human behavior, environmental factors, and just the absolute unpredictability of the natural world.
It really does. And that psychological safety blanket you mentioned is such a crucial starting point for this event. To really comprehend how a tragedy like this unfolds, we have to look closely at the environment where it took place.
Yeah.
I mean, this didn't happen in some curated, predictable city park.
Right, or like a managed nature reserve with paved paths.
Exactly. The location is the Bieszczady Mountains, specifically near the town of Piona. And the Bieszczady Range is part of the Carpathian Mountains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it represents one of the very few remaining true wilderness areas left in modern Europe. It's defined by dense, ancient forests, steep ravines.
Really rugged stuff.
Extremely. It's an ecosystem that has largely been allowed to operate according to its own biological imperatives.
Right.
It's a place where apex predators, specifically European brown bears, still roam freely across vast territory.
And the scale of that wilderness is something I think most of us really struggle to visualize.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, when we hear mountains or forest, we often picture marked trails, ranger stations, maybe designated parking lots.
Yeah, a gift shop at the trailhead.
Exactly. But the Bieszczady region is uncompromising. It operates by a set of rules that have absolutely nothing to do with human convenience. You step just a few miles away from a main road, and the infrastructure of the 21st century just completely vanishes.
It really does. And yet, the untouched nature of that landscape is a massive draw for the people who actually live near it.
Right, it's their backyard.
Exactly. It becomes integrated into their daily lives, their local culture, and that integration brings us to the core event detailed in the report.
Yeah, the mother and son.
Right. We have a 58-year-old woman and her 27-year-old son who went into these mountains for a very specific traditional purpose. They were out there searching for shed deer antlers.
And my understanding of antler hunting completely changed the context of this event for me.
How so?
Well, I initially pictured like a casual weekend hike, But looking for shed antlers requires a fundamentally different approach to moving through a forest.
Yes, it really does.
You can't just stroll loudly down a paved, heavily trafficked path. You have to go completely off the grid. You're deliberately bushwhacking through dense, untamed brush.
Right. You're not walking where people usually walk.
Exactly. And your eyes are constantly scanning the forest floor. You're analyzing the dirt, the undergrowth, rather than scanning the horizon for danger.
You're intensely focused downward.
Yeah, and furthermore, you're moving as quietly as possible, trying to cover an immense amount of difficult terrain.
And the physical mechanics of that activity, they actively increase your vulnerability.
Because you're distracted.
Well, when you're looking down, focused on complex patterns in the foliage to spot the curve of an antler, you're severely limiting your peripheral awareness.
Wow, yeah, that makes sense.
And to maximize their chances of finding those antlers, the mother and son employed a very common strategy. They physically separated.
Oh.
Yeah, they chose to walk parallel paths through this incredibly dense, mountainous forest.
And that separation leads to the detail in the report that is, honestly, almost difficult to comprehend.
It's chilling.
It really is.
Okay.
They were physically apart, navigating this wild terrain independently, but they were actively speaking to each other on a mobile phone call.
Right.
They were literally mid-conversation, and without any warning, the son hears his mother scream 2 words, "Bear! Bear!"
Yeah.
And immediately after that, the connection just abruptly drops dead.
Experiencing that moment as the person on the other end of the line, I mean, it represents a terrifying auditory trauma.
I can't even imagine.
The son was entirely present for the exact second of his mother's terror. He's processing it in real time through the speaker.
But he couldn't do anything.
Exactly. He was physically isolated and entirely powerless to intervene. The digital tether allowed him to witness the event, but it offered absolutely no physical utility.
I'm really struggling to reconcile their comfort level with the reality of the environment, to be honest.
In what way?
Well, the Bieszczady Mountains are a known habitat for brown bears, right?
Yes, very much so.
Yet they felt comfortable enough to completely separate, drop their situational awareness to scan the dirt, and casually chat on the phone while wandering off trail.
Right.
Given that they were that comfortable, does this suggest a level of routine or familiarity with these woods that was violently shattered here?
Absolutely. The human mind is remarkably efficient at normalizing risk to reduce our baseline anxiety.
Okay.
It's a psychological phenomenon called risk acclimatization.
Risk acclimatization.
Right. When you live in close proximity to a formidable wilderness, or, you spend decades successfully foraging in those woods without a negative encounter, your brain stops processing the environment as an active threat.
So the extraordinary just becomes mundane to them.
Exactly. The forest is stripped of its danger in the human mind and recategorized as a recreational resource.
Wow.
The underlying danger of the apex predator doesn't diminish at all, but our perception of it drops to almost zero.
And that sudden break in routine really highlights the absolute unpredictability of wild environments.
Yes. That acclimatization, paired with the false security of the phone call, created a devastating vulnerability. Nature just does not adhere to human routines or our perceived safety parameters.
No, it doesn't. And that abruptly severed phone call instantly shifted the reality for the son.
He knew immediately something was wrong.
He realized the catastrophic nature of the situation and immediately contacted emergency services. And this is where the sheer scale of the response becomes apparent in the report.
It was massive.
Yeah, an enormous instantaneous mobilization. We're talking about local police forces, specialized firefighting units, and dedicated mountain rescue crews.
And that mobilization highlights a severe disconnect between our societal emergency infrastructure and the reality of an untamed landscape.
How so?
Well, we've engineered a world where a distress call initiates a rapid, highly coordinated response. We rely on paved grids, GPS coordinates, clear lines of sight.
Right.
But the moment those rescue crews entered the Bieszczady Mountains, they slammed into 2 insurmountable environmental obstacles.
And I think the environment itself essentially became a secondary antagonist here.
It really did.
Because, I always fall into this modern expectation that calling an emergency number is essentially asking for teleportation.
Right, you expect them to just appear.
Yeah. We assume that dialing the digits guarantees immediate physical salvation. But the source material details how the topography physically neutralized the rescue effort.
It was a nightmare for them.
The terrain was incredibly steep and unforgiving, but more crucially, the mobile phone reception was failing continuously.
And we often treat poor cell reception as like an annoying technical glitch. But in a mountainous environment, it is purely a function of physics.
Oh, right.
Cellular networks rely on high-frequency radio waves transmitted between your device and a local tower.
Okay.
These waves require a relatively clear line of sight. They simply cannot penetrate immense volumes of solid rock, dense earth, and heavy forest canopy.
So the mountains were actually blocking the signal?
Actively absorbing and deflecting the radio signals, yes. When the rescue crews dropped into the ravines and navigated the steep ridges, they were thrust into communication dead zones.
Wow.
They were attempting to coordinate a massive search operation while effectively blind and deaf.
They're fighting the physical mass of the earth just to establish a location.
Exactly.
And tragically, the friction of that landscape resulted in a fatal delay. The report confirms the grim outcome by the time the emergency crews managed to bypass the failing technology, conquer the terrain, and physically reach the woman. She had already passed away.
It's awful.
It is. The source provides a very sobering assessment from a firefighter at the scene. He described the victim's wounds as lacerated and extensive injuries, specifically to the head.
And reading a clinical description of injuries that severe, it immediately triggers our deepest evolutionary fears.
Yeah, definitely.
It forces us to ask why an encounter would escalate to that level of violence.
Well, when I hear about extensive head trauma, my immediate, almost visceral assumption is to frame it as a targeted predatory hunt.
Which is a very common reaction.
We're conditioned by movies and sensationalized stories to view large predators as malicious hunters, constantly seeking out human prey.
Right.
But looking at the broader data provided in the report regarding this specific region, the statistics paint a vastly different, almost contradictory picture.
The data is really what elevates this incident from a tragic anecdote to a profound environmental anomaly.
Yeah.
To understand the mathematical improbability of this event, you have to consider the population density. The entire country of Poland has a brown bear population of roughly 100 individuals.
100 bears for a country of over 38 million people.
Right. It's a remarkably small number. And the vast majority of those 100 bears are concentrated precisely in the Bieszczady region.
Okay.
But even within that concentration, a brown bear's home range can span hundreds of square kilometers. You're taking a very small number of animals and dispersing them across an incredibly vast, rugged mountain range.
So they're very spread out.
Extremely. The statistical probability of a human and a bear occupying the exact same square meter of forest at the exact same second is infinitesimally small.
It's the ultimate needle in a haystack scenario. The math alone makes an encounter incredibly unlikely.
Yes, it does.
And the historical record backs up that math. The report notes that prior to this event, the last fatal bear attack in Poland occurred a full decade ago, back in 2014.
10 years.
10 years without a lethal incident in the exact habitat where these animals live. I mean, this isn't a forest plagued by aggressive predators. It's an environment where the two species generally manage to avoid each other entirely.
And the rarity of the event strongly supports the theory put forward by the victim's family.
What did they think happened?
They publicly stated their belief that the woman did not provoke the animal, but rather accidentally surprised it, or stepped far too close before either party realized what was happening.
Just a total accident.
Right. This shifts the framework away from a predatory hunt and toward a catastrophic mutual startle.
But the mechanics of how someone could get close enough to step on a massive brown bear without noticing it are fascinating.
It is surprising until you hear the details.
Right. The report offers a really chilling explanation. The victim's second son spoke to the media and pointed out a detail that completely rewrote my understanding of the woods.
Yeah, his quote was striking.
He stated that a resting bear can lie incredibly low to the forest floor. He specifically described it as looking exactly like a mound of dark earth.
And that description highlights the immense power of evolutionary camouflage.
This is terrifying.
It exploits the blind spots in human visual processing. We navigate the world relying heavily on pattern recognition. Okay, there's a psychological phenomenon known as pareidolia, which causes our brains to constantly scan for familiar shapes. We look for faces, distinct silhouettes, or the outline of a limb. We expect a threat to look like a threat.
We're looking for the shape of a bear.
Precisely, which is the opposite of what the environment presents. A brown bear has evolved over millennia to perfectly match the color, texture, and light absorption of the forest floor.
Wow.
When it lowers its profile, it eliminates its distinct silhouette. It essentially hacks human visual processing.
Does it?
Yeah. If a woman is walking quietly through the brush, her eyes focus downward, scanning the chaotic visual noise of twigs and leaves for the specific shape of an antler, a camouflaged bear simply registers as background terrain.
That is wild.
It's a localized cloaking device provided by nature. She doesn't see an apex predator. Her brain tells her she's looking at a pile of dirt.
I mean, walking in the woods and nearly stepping on a camouflaged snake or a strangely shaped rock is one thing, but scaled up to the size of an apex predator.
It's a whole different level.
Does the fact that the bear was entirely camouflaged change our understanding of this event from a predatory attack to a tragic mutual startle?
I think it absolutely does. It transforms the entire narrative. It's no longer a story of an animal stalking a human.
Right.
It's the story of two species perfectly aligned for a disastrous intersection. The camouflage was so effective that the proximity became lethal.
Unbelievable.
And the timing of this intersection adds another critical biological layer to the tragedy. Forest officials provided vital context regarding the time of year this occurred.
Because it was spring.
Yes. The seasonal timing is perhaps the most crucial variable here. The authorities pointed out that this incident occurred shortly after the bears had awakened from their winter hibernation.
And I always conceptualize hibernation simply as a long, peaceful sleep.
Most people do.
But the biological reality of it is actually quite extreme, isn't it?
It is an incredibly taxing biological process.
Mhm.
A bear doesn't just sleep. It survives by slowly consuming its own fat reserves over months of inactivity.
Just burning through it.
Right. When a brain bear finally emerges from its den in the spring, it's operating at a massive, critical caloric deficit. It has lost a significant percentage of its body weight.
Wow, they must be starving.
They are. The animal enters a biological state called hyperphagia, an extreme, intense drive to consume calories rapidly to stave off starvation and rebuild muscle mass.
So their entire biological imperative shifts to a desperate search for fuel.
Exactly. And that desperation fundamentally alters their spatial behavior and their risk assessment.
How so?
Well, a bear that might normally stay deep in the inaccessible ridges will begin moving to lower elevations. They start pushing closer to the edges of human settlements.
Because that's where the food is.
Yeah, they navigate ravines and valleys because that's where the snow melts first, where the early vegetation sprouts, and where easier calories might be found.
Right.
They're groggy, heavily focused on foraging, and operating in a state of high physiological stress.
So we have an animal operating under intense biological pressure, moving through the exact same transitional zones of the forest that a human is quietly navigating to look for antlers.
It creates a terrifying perfect storm.
Yeah, it really does. And the officials categorize this not as malice, but as an abrupt, unexpected collision. The bear did not want to be disturbed, and the woman certainly did not want to disturb it.
No, of course not. And the fallout from that collision reverberated instantly through the surrounding human population.
I can imagine.
The local Bukowsko-Kamin authorities were forced to intervene aggressively to manage the immediate danger.
What did they do?
They issued urgent, region-wide public warnings, explicitly instructing all residents and visitors to stay entirely out of the surrounding woods until further notice.
And I want you to imagine the psychological shift for the local residents there.
It must have been profound.
Right. Think about how we categorize the spaces around our homes. We mentally divide the world into the tame and the wild.
Yes, we do.
The woods behind your house are categorized as a tame recreational zone. It's the place you go for a casual hike, or to walk your dog, or to quietly look for deer antlers on a weekend.
It's familiar territory.
Exactly. But when the authorities lock down that exact same forest and declare it an active hazard zone, that invisible boundary between the civilized world and the raw wilderness is violently redrawn.
It forces a community to confront the illusion of their dominance over the landscape.
Yeah.
The woods revert from a recreational asset back to a primordial habitat.
Wow.
The realization that an apex predator is actively moving through the very spaces where children play or people hike, it shatters that localized sense of security.
Yeah.
The environment reclaims its wildness overnight.
It does, and the human reaction to that loss of control is deeply revealing. The report details that a prosecutor and a medical examiner were formally dispatched to the mountain to investigate the scene of the incident.
Right.
Applying our structured legal frameworks to an act of raw nature feels almost absurd when you really examine it.
It does feel absurd, but it highlights our deep-seated need to impose order on chaos.
Okay, how do you mean?
When a human tragedy occurs, our societal reflex is to investigate, document, and assign causality. We deploy prosecutors to a forest because we're uncomfortable with the idea that nature operates without morality or legal constraints.
We want someone to blame.
Exactly. We want to process the event through paperwork and official inquiries, even when the root cause is simply the brutal, unmanageable reality of two species crossing paths in the brush.
It's a coping mechanism. We investigate the mountain because we can't arrest it.
That's a perfect way to put it.
As we pull all these threads together, the full picture of this deep dive becomes clear. It began with the chilling detail of a dropped phone call, but it ultimately serves as a stark reminder of the sheer fragility of human life when it intersects with the unfiltered mechanics of the natural world.
We examine the severe biological pressures of post-hibernation wildlife, the complex physical limitations of our emergency technology and rugged topography, and the incredible, often deceptive power of evolutionary camouflage.
It really demonstrates how rapidly a completely mundane, quiet hobby, a mother and son carefully walking through the woods, can escalate into a historic regional tragedy.
It's sobering.
It's a testament to the fact that when we leave the pavement and step into the tree line, we are crossing a profound threshold.
We are.
We're leaving an environment engineered for our comfort and entering a complex ecosystem that has spent millions of years adapting to survive without us.
We're simply visitors in a home where the permanent residents are biologically designed to remain unseen.
And we rely on the illusion that we're separate from the food chain, but events like this remind us that we are always embedded within it the moment we enter those wild spaces.
Always.
And that thought brings me right back to the victim's son and his description of the camouflage, because it's an image that will fundamentally change how I view the outdoors.
The mound of earth.
Yes.
Yeah.
He said a massive resting predator looks just like a mound of dark earth. So as you go about your day, I want you to keep that biological reality in mind. The next time you take a walk through a dense forest, or even just wander off the path in a large local park, ask yourself a question. Think about how human vision prioritizes movement and familiar shapes, completely ignoring the background terrain.
We see what we expect to see.
Right. How many times have you walked right past something wild? How many times has something breathing, watching, and perfectly adapted to its environment been resting just a few feet away from your boots, completely undetected, simply because it looked exactly like the earth you were walking on?
It's a haunting thought.
You might have had your phone in your hand, feeling entirely secure and connected to the world, never realizing just how close you were standing to the absolute edge.
Okay, one question for you. What really happened in the remote Polish forest when the woman screamed, "Bear, bear," before the call ended? And could this rare tragedy have been prevented with stronger wildlife warnings or safety rules? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.